The story that you are about to read happened around 12 years ago, so I guess I was 15. I grew up in a rural area of North Carolina. There wasn't really a lot to do growing up, but thankfully, I had a few cousins that lived around me, as well as my sister, so we found plenty of things to get into, and were also relatively close in age. We lived in a pretty inconspicuous area. Just a few family members, friends, and a basic little stretch of road that connected to a local state park. It was the kind of neighborhood where people were either someone you've known your entire life, or it was straight up family. This happened around the end of July, whenever we were already gearing up to go back to school. My cousins and my sister and I decided that we were going to have one last bash before we had to go back to school the following month. We decided that we were going to have a quote-unquote seance in the woods. If you go a mile or so behind my uncle's house, who lived directly behind us, there's what's officially called a psychiatric hospital, but in the spirit of total honesty, it's an asylum for the criminally insane. The individuals that lived at this psychiatric hospital were pretty nasty cases. The kind of people that the medical psychiatric industry were frankly too scared to deal with, so they just stuck them in places like this to get them out of the public eye. I know that living a mile from a psych ward that you can literally cut through the woods to get to sounds like it would be all kinds of spooky fun, but it was never something that we cared for or even really talked about. I mean, it's not like we would ever do anything to get sent there. Anyway, the patients were not treated very well, and the staff was highly underqualified, but thankfully, we had a pretty good local sheriff's department who kept a 24/7 eye on the place to the point that there were armed officers on ATVs that would patrol the woods around the place usually once a day to make sure everything was as it should be. You have to understand that the vast majority of these patients were people who had already been in and out of the system, usually a couple of times before they arrived there. On this particular night, things just didn't really sit right, but as I already stated, we weren't skittish teenagers. This was a safe area we knew well and were surrounded by friends, family, and even law enforcement, so we were virtually fearless 99% of the time. So we sucked our guts in and soldiered on. My older cousin and my sister decided that we should go further into the woods than we had ever gone before. I mean, if we were going to do this, we needed to do it right. We had all of our, we'll say, makeshift seance supplies in our backpacks. We headed out into the woods and got to the spot in which we were going to have our seance. This was an area that my uncle had taken my older cousin a few summers before on a hunting trip. As we began to set everything up, we had a radio playing and some large outdoor lanterns, the kind that you would get for camping, food, beer, cigarettes, and anything else we could steal from my uncle and not get caught. You know, all the fixings and trimmings to set up for a long night of fun. Before we even had a chance to begin our seance, we started to hear strange things in the woods. Being relatively unafraid, we just assumed that it was some kind of an animal. We were raised in the area, so that wasn't anything new. It was usually just something small like a raccoon or a possum. We ignored the sounds as they had stopped and went back to our fun, laughing, drinking, smoking, and fixing to start our seance. Then, out of the blue, we began to faintly hear a voice saying, "Hey, come here." This was not the voice of anyone in the group, so naturally, we all assumed that someone had recorded something on their phone and was trying to scare the rest of us. So we all just kind of shrugged it off. My oldest cousin continued on with the seance, and we heard it again. "Hey, come here." At this point, even though I was a little younger than the rest of the group, I kind of stood up and said, "Alright, dipshits, enough is enough. Whoever is playing that crap on their phone, grow a pair of balls and stick it down in front of the group." Because as of this point, I was getting really pissed off that the seance was being ruined by somebody dicking off. We all pulled up the home screens of our phones and let each other investigate them. We also emptied out our pockets and proved that it was none of us. The rational minded would have assumed that one of us in the group simply cleared their phone off and sat it down, but literally within 5 minutes, we heard the voice again. But this time, it wasn't so, vanilla, if you will. This time it said, "Get the fuck over here, now!" By this point, we were all terrified, frozen in fear. We looked at each other and all at once we ran, leaving everything behind. We kept going and going, not even caring what direction we were going in. The longer we ran, the more the footsteps that were following behind us became faint. As the trees began to part, we saw bright flashing lights. Assuming we were approaching a road, we ran towards it. Not caring if it was a wreck or a traffic stop, we just wanted a cop. As we broke the wood line, our hearts began to pound in terror, even harder than they already were before, when we saw what was in front of us. The psych ward. A cop standing in front of his car then saw us and shined a light saying, "What the hell are you doing? Don't you guys know a patient escaped and a girl is missing?" We shuddered briefly, then literally broke down in tears and told him everything. Clearly seasoned on the job, he tried to calm us down, then told one of the younger officers to take us home. After what felt like hours of hell in the woods, it was all suddenly over. Within a 10-minute car ride, we were back at my uncle's house like nothing had ever happened. The patient that had escaped was never given a name nor apprehended, and the girl, who sadly I knew, named Paige C., was found dead off the highway going out of town by a patrol officer at around 6 o'clock the next morning. To put it bluntly, she was your stereotypical 17-year-old sperm bank cheerleader. I mean, she and I always got along pretty well, but minus minor pleasantries in the hall or brief conversations at lunch, we weren't really tight. Since an underage girl was murdered that night, the cops tried to keep the whole situation quiet for the family's sake because we all know how the media is. Over time, it kind of just faded from memory, and life, as it so often and cruelly does, eventually moved on. Now, to say that it was for sure the psych patient who killed her may be a stretch, or maybe just my own imagination, but you have to admit that between our experience in the woods and then later on the same night, Paige ended up murdered, it's pretty damn strange. We oftentimes talk about that night and what could have been. It's honestly become a story we tell at almost every holiday get-together or family barbecue. Kind of our screwed up, twisted way of processing it, I guess. The vast majority of the time, I can just kind of look back at it like a memory of ignorant teenage bliss. But other times, now that I'm an adult, the reality sets in about what could have really happened in those woods, and it chills me to the bone to think of what could have been. Paige's mom eventually moved out of town after a few years of strange stares and the occasional, "Oh, honey, how are you?" The kind that small towns are known all too well for. The reality is, I don't think that any of us will ever be the same. Something like that changes you, shapes you, breaks you. You can believe this story if you want, or call it BS. Frankly, I don't care. This isn't the kind of thing you make up. I only ask, if you're going to be messing around in the woods, please be careful. Years ago, I was in San Francisco with my best friend Jay. We were both 20 at the time, and both female. We'd been friends since we were 12, and already had a lot of experiences together by then. This was just a fun, casual day in the city by the bay. Jay and I had nothing to do, so we took a walk. We walked around town up some steep hills with no destination in mind. As dusk was approaching, we were in a typical San Francisco neighborhood. On a hill, houses all close together, cars parked nearly on top of one another in order to fit into the highly sought-after spaces. This was when we came upon a lovely park. The homes were across the street from the park, as you would see in a typical San Francisco photo. This wasn't Jay's neighborhood, and I was new to the city, so the area was unfamiliar. The park was all grass and trees, a full city block. In the middle, there was a small playground area for kids enclosed by a very short fence with a gate. It was clearly a kids area, with a couple of swings, monkey bars, a metal slide inside the fenced area, and was completely deserted at the time. There was literally no one else at the park at this time, as dark was quickly approaching. Jay and I were always doing random, spontaneous things, so one of us suggested we swing in the playground. We entered the gate to the play area, where there were exactly 2 swings, one for each of us. Now, I'm not sure why it occurred to me, but I suggested we sit on the swings facing opposite directions so that in case someone approached us, one of us would see them coming. So we did, Jay facing the entrance to the play area, me facing the street. We were laughing and talking as we swung like kids, when suddenly Jay said, "There's a man coming toward us." I just laughed at her, certain she was pulling my leg. She said it again, and added that he didn't have a kid with him. I still laughed at her. We were both swinging high when she jumped off her swing and ran the opposite direction from the gate, jumping the short fence and running out of the park toward the street. She left me there, which finally caused me to stop laughing and turn around toward the entrance to the swings, where I was now alone, but not quite. There was the man, alone, almost at the gate to where I was. He was maybe 40, dressed well, and without a child. He was just opening the little gate to the swing area, silently, where I was trying to slow down my swing to jump off and run toward Jay, who was by now running down the sidewalk, maybe 250 feet from me. It felt like long minutes before I was able to get my wits about me and clumsily leap off my swing. I ran the direction Jay had gone, jumping the fence, going toward the sidewalk and out of the park as fast as my legs would go. I glanced back just once and saw the man turning around and walking back out through the gate of the playground area. He had not made a sound nor said a word. I didn't stop running, and once I caught up with Jay, we both kept running down the hill, all the way to an open market where people were around. We stayed there a long while, until we could be sure he hadn't followed us before heading back to my place. We talked about how he was the only person coming to a dark, deserted park, and why he would enter the playground area where 2 women were swinging and say nothing, and why he turned and walked back out as we ran away. Obviously, he did it because we were there. He had no other reason to go through the playground gate, nor to walk right back out when we left. I'll never know what his intentions were, but they were, at the very least, suspicious, and I'm glad I didn't stick around to find out what would have happened had I not gotten off the swing and out of the park when I did. This happened about 6 or 7 years ago on a summer night. I was at my friend's house one night, and there were 3 of us. We decided that we wanted to go play Ding Dong Ditch at around 11:30 or so. The neighborhood that he lived in is very dark at night, as there are no street lights, only torches on street corners that are only there so cars don't drive off the road. My friends and I have gone ding dong ditching a few times before, so we knew that we should relieve our bladders before heading off. We were already outside at this point, so we just relieved ourselves in the bushes. One of the friends and I had already finished, so we stood towards the end of the driveway talking while the other friend was closer to the house still. While we talked, I faced out toward the street while my friend faced me. As we talked, I saw a tall, pure black figure running up the sidewalk across the street. It took me a second to process what I was seeing, but when I did, I must have shown an expression of shock because the friend I was talking to started running for the house right when I did. What happened was, I saw the thing, my friend said that he heard it running, and the other friend near the house just ran inside because we did, and was honestly in denial about the whole thing. Some details of this creature: it was very tall. I was probably 5'10" at the time, and I could tell this thing was significantly taller than me, probably 6'2" at least. It ran on 2 legs and had the physique of a lean runner. I know I said that this neighborhood was very dark, but this thing was black, pure black, and there was no sign of it wearing any clothing. If it was wearing clothing, it had to be some skin-tight outfit that was black. It was too fast for me to call it human. I refer to this thing as an it, because I truly don't believe this is a human, even though it was shaped like one. I ran track and cross country at the time, so I could judge how fast it was running, and there was not an ounce of doubt in my mind that tells me it could possibly be a human being. Mind you, it was also running uphill. My friends, even the one who heard it running, didn't even believe what I saw. But one night, later that same summer, My friend had a large gathering of boys who all went ding-dong ditching. Sadly, I was not present on this occasion. The boys made it far down the neighborhood when they saw it, a dark figure running that fits my description. They were much farther away than I was, so I take my description as the more accurate one. In their case, however, they saw it running back and forth across the street, running out of view, then back into view, then out again. We went out on other occasions, but never saw the thing again.